everyone, it's Heather. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be talking about books that I vibe with in the autumn season, particularly spooky books, because that's what I think of when I think of fall. So these are in no particular order, they're just going to be as I pick them up. I'm going to start with the series of unfortunate events. This gives me fall vibes like no other. It is about, everyone knows what Lemony Snicket is about, right? It's about 3 children who lose their parents and are basically hunted down by one of the most notorious villains alive. He wants to adopt them, get their inheritance, and he tracks them down, puts them in these really dangerous situations, and it's just spooky and whimsical and fun. It's not fun. It's really sad, but it's also, it is fun, which is kind of a messed up thing to say. So the next book is by Agatha Christie. It is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And I do not want to talk about what the plot of this book is, because I actually rated it 3 stars, but if I hadn't have known what the plot was, like I basically knew what the plot twist was going into this book, and it kind of ruined the experience for me, so I don't want to say anything about it, but it is a cozy mystery. It's part of the Hercule Poirot, series repertoire. If you go into it blind, definitely worth a read. The next book is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, and this is a story about 2 magicians in the 1800s in England, and one of them is a pupil, one of them is a teacher, and they start to disagree about their views of magic and like what magic should be used for. And one of them is drawn to more dangerous types of magic, and it was really entertaining, really well written, fascinating. It is on the longer side. It's a chunker of a book, but I remember, I've only read this once, but I adored it, and I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, might reread it this year too. The next book is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. This is a staple in Gothic literature. I read this back in 2014. I am absolutely due for a reread of this book. This opens with the main character, Walter. Walter, he encounters a woman in white on a moonlit London road. The whole book focuses on him trying to figure out the mystery of the woman in white, and it is haunting and atmospheric and suspenseful, and anyone who is a fan of Gothic literature, if you have not picked this up yet, you should definitely pick this up. The next book that I have is also a staple in Gothic literature, and it is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is a hideous cover. Dorian Gray wants to stay beautiful forever, and an artist has painted a picture of him, and he hopes that the picture will age as opposed to his person. This is a book about morality and the depths of beauty, selfishness, lust, greed, all of those things. This is a book that I read when I was younger. I think I was in college or before, and I think it's accessible to people of all ages, worth the hype, but if you have the choice, maybe get a better looking cover. The next book that I will be talking about is Thomas Ligotti's Songs of a Dead Dreamer and Grim Scribe. This is a collection of short stories, and typically I'm not super into short stories. My favorite part of stories and reading is being in the middle of a book. I love the coziness of like being familiar with characters. I don't love starting things. So reading short stories is like you're constantly being introduced to people and characters, and that's just not what I want from a cozy reading experience. But with horror, it's a little bit different. I've read this and his other collection of he has a bunch of collections, but this and Teatro Grotesco. If you're looking for short stories that aren't written by Edgar Allan Poe or H.P. Lovecraft, I suggest checking out Thomas Ligotti. This one's pretty spooky, pretty scary. The next book that gives me Autumn Vibes is the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman. This is the first volume. It also like just like generally gives off either autumn vibes or McDonald's vibes, ketchup and mustard kind of deal. This is a 12-volume series, and it follows the character Dream, or Morpheus, who has been imprisoned for the last 70 years. He eventually escapes his imprisonment and goes on a quest to find his lost objects of power, and on his quest he encounters all of these characters, including Death, Lucifer. You get the vibes. It is spooky, and it's a fascinating story, and it's a storytelling that I hadn't really experienced before. And when I first read this, when did I read this? I read this for the first time in 2015, and I was just getting into graphic novels at the time, and even since then, with all of the graphic novels that I've read, this is told in such an interesting way. Not only is the concept interesting, but just the way that the story is told over the course of the 12 volumes. It's definitely worth a read, and I think it is perfect to read during the fall season as well. The next book that I want to recommend for autumn vibes is Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. So this follows Sue, who is an orphan. She was left with a woman named Mrs. Suxby when she was a baby, and she grows up within a family of petty thieves and criminals called Fingersmiths. One day, a man called Gentleman, who is like the most beloved of the Fingersmiths, comes and has a proposition for her. He wants Sue to pose as a maid for a woman named Maud Lily in an attempt to persuade Maud to fall in love with Gentleman, and he can have her fortune. So things don't go as planned, and Sue starts to care for Maud, and she falls in love with the house. It's a very atmospheric book as well. The house itself is almost like a character typical of Gothic literature and fiction. There is other stuff at work that Sue doesn't really understand or know what's happening. There are some LGBT relationships happening as well, and it's just it's not, I keep saying these things are fun. It is a fun read, but it's also a dark read. The next book that I want to recommend is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. It is the story of an author named Viva Winter, I think that's her name, and she has been very secretive about her life. No one knows where she comes from. Nobody knows what her story is. Everybody is dying to know, like, what is your deal? And finally, when she's older, she is ready to tell her story. So she hires a biographer to come write about her life, and we get her past as well as the story of the biographer as well. And it, again, is like this Gothic tale. It's about family. It's also dark but fun. You can sense the vibe that I associate with autumn. The last 3 books that I will talk about are 3 of my all-time favorite books. The first of those is The Shining by Stephen King. This is the story of a family who is snowed into a hotel that they are taking care of for the winter season. Spooky things start happening to the family, and because of the family, I mean, it's a classic Stephen King book for the spooky season. Next, I want to recommend Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. This is my favorite Margaret Atwood book by far. I absolutely adore this book. It's about a woman named Grace who is suspected of murder. She's imprisoned, and she's being visited by a psychologist who is trying to work with her to get the story of what happened. She's saying she doesn't remember anything, and the psychologist slowly becomes obsessed with her and like has this downward spiral of obsession, and it is so good. We may or may not get satisfying answers. I can't praise this story enough. It is absolutely worth it. It's better than The Handmaid's Tale. It's better than anything else I've ever read by Margaret Atwood. And I also loved I think it was on Netflix, the series. So good. And then the last book that I'll recommend for the autumn is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is the story of an unnamed woman who meets a mysterious man. They fall in love and they get married, and she is brought back to his estate where the specter of his first wife, Rebecca, follows her around, not follows her, but she's compared to Rebecca in everything seemingly. She turns Rebecca into this force within her own mind, and she becomes obsessed with figuring out the story of Rebecca, basically. And it's just like quintessential Gothic literature. Like, it's just so good. I mean, I have not heard anyone who has read it and not enjoyed it. It's worth the read, worth the hype, worth it all. These are the books that I vibe with the most in the autumn season. I would love recommendations for dark but fun books, and if you've read any of these, I would love to know that as well. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.